I am Kathleen Staten, the manager of Music Constructed, this dynamic platform which is meant to serve as a resource for all music educators at every step and stage of their career. And we are so excited to be presenting Elise Hackl Blumenstein today, correct?
We have the new part to the last name.
And we're going to be just having an introduction to these two giant topics of universal design and social emotional learning. We, of course, hope that you'll join us for the follow-up tomorrow, the conversation, and then ultimately the application, or how you can actually put this into lesson planning practice. But I am sure you would much rather hear it directly from Elise. And so with that, I'll hand it over. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And I also want to preface that, like Kathleen said, it's an introduction today. So we're going to talk about what these concepts mean. I know we have so many acronyms. If you're at a point where you have no idea what I'm talking about, or you feel like a super pro, feel free to unmute, put something in the chat, throw out some ideas. This is our introduction piece. Tomorrow is going to be more of an open conversation about all these elements. And then Thursday is going to be a deep dive. Let's come out of here with actual lesson plans and actual activities that you can take with you. And we're kind of going to peer review some lessons and activities together. So I might ask for some audience involvement. So I might ask you to unmute or throw up an emoji or type something in the chat. And I just want to start by asking, how many of you have heard of universal design for learning before and actually have an idea of what that means? You can throw up a hand, a little emoji, throw something in the chat. Some of us, but not all of us. Okay, about half. We're about mixed. Okay, cool. So that's great. And then I'm assuming, but again, I could be wrong. How many of us have heard the term social emotional learning thrown around over the last couple of years? A bit more. Yeah. So the great and terrible news is that because of the pandemic, we've really taken the time to get to know our students, get to know what their needs are. And we've had the time to realize, okay, there are some things that we're not able to meet for all of our students. All of our students learn in different ways. And when they were sent home or potentially staying at home for another school year, we were able to see into the lives of a lot of our students. And what universal design does is it really looks at a student's needs and different ways of teaching them. So I have a slide deck that I'm going to go ahead and share, and I believe we put that in the chat as well, so you can access these materials later. But I'm going to go ahead and share that so you can see what I am talking about. And I'm going to make this full screen for you here. I just want to full screen this. And you know, you'd think with my tech background, I'd be so good at presenting all of this, but we get there. All right, so this is again just an introduction. So social emotional learning, we know it's the process in which people utilize skills or attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve goals, maintain relationships, and make responsible decisions. So this is really three main areas. It's that identity piece, who we are, right? It's that belonging piece, maintaining those relationships, and then that decision making, that third element, responsible decision making. And these are things that we do often as music teachers when we're working in ensembles. We have to understand who we are and understand our part in relation to other people. This is a natural thing that we do in music. Now, universal design for learning is an approach to learning with success for all students at the heart of it. So what does that really mean? What that means is multiple means. If you take anything away from this and you don't know what universal design is, multiple means. Those are the two big words that I want you to take away from this. It's really broken up into three main areas: the multiple means of engagement, of representation, and of action and expression. So for those of you that can think back to learning styles, that was kind of modeled in multiple means, right? We have kinesthetic learners, we have people who learn in very different ways. This is taking that and really making it for everyone. And I know when we think universal design, we think students with disabilities. And yes, it is for students with disabilities, and it's for everyone. It is for everyone. We all learn differently. So we're going to talk about these three areas. And again, if you have any thoughts, questions as we go through, please feel free to unmute or put it in the chat so I make sure I don't miss that. I will be checking in on that as well. And yes, I see those of you testing. So multiple means of engagement. There are lots of ways that we can do this in the classroom. And one of those ways is really giving independent choice and autonomy. So when we think about what that means, it's giving students responsibility. It's allowing them to have choices and preferences that they can do in our music room. It might be centers. It might be choosing a specific instrument that they would like to play for this three-part piece. It's providing options for self-regulation. As musicians, we have these moments where we're sitting there and waiting for our part. We have these moments where we might have to be listening to somebody else. And the ways in which we regulate are going to be different from other people. So, how do we keep our students engaged in what we're doing when they're not playing, when they're waiting for their turn, when maybe something is underwhelming or overwhelming? And it's also developing that self assessment and reflection. And again, I know, especially, I see this in band in my district all the time. Our band teacher has reflections and self assessment down. They've got it down. Every student walks out of the room with an exit slip. They have recordings and they talk about their performances with other students, providing those options for self assessment and reflection, which sounds a little bit like SEL, but we'll get there. Then, if we go ahead and look at what that might mean, here are some examples. So again, we talked about giving independent choice and autonomy. That's going to look a little bit different for every student because everybody has different things that they're interested in. They have different choices that they can make, and they have different ways of feeling empowered. It's about that empowerment piece. Providing options for self-regulation, something that I like to do in my classroom is giving a checklist for an assignment. If we're in an elementary school classroom and I know that we have 5 activities that day, writing them down and saying to our students, we're doing this first, this is what's next, here's what's next, then these 2 pieces. We have a schedule that we follow lesson plans. Why can't we share that with our students? It's just another option for them to be on track with what we're doing so they can feel like they are part of that as well. And sometimes it might be that step 4 is your choice. Then we're tying in that independent choice as well. And then again, that self-assessment and reflection piece. In my class, that's looked like establishing and discussing a daily goal. So every day we walk into the classroom, my students set a goal from themselves. And this was based actually on work that we did with our social worker. So that was determining goals for them throughout the day. They have point sheets that assess how far they've gotten on that goal. And let's say they meet, it depends on the student, 80% of the activities in that day, they met their goal. Then they're able to get a prize or get a sticker or whatever it might be. And it's really teaching them to reflect on what they've done throughout the day. But the key point is that we establish that goal together because I want to teach them how to set goals for themselves, how to know the point in which they're at, and how to keep track of that. Ultimately, as musicians, we're the ones practicing. We're the ones singing. We're the ones with ourselves as we go on. We know ourselves best. So teaching students to check in on themselves and giving them the tools on how to do so is so important. So that's a little overview of multiple means of engagement. Now we're going to take it over to representation. And this really, really ties into when we talk about like multiple intelligences, because it's all about varying the ways in which we give information or really take in information. So right now we're doing this. I'm talking at you really right now. There is a slide on here and I've given visuals like our previous slide to help you remember what that means. We're sharing these slides afterwards so you can look back at your own, and we're recording this. That's 5 different ways that we're giving the same information. So if you're somebody who doesn't want to look at their screen or can't look at their screen, you can still listen to what I'm saying. If you're somebody who has trouble reading the text on this slide, you can look at the pictures or listen to what I'm saying. It's all about giving multiple means of information. Then, especially in music, it's about clarifying vocabulary and symbols. We have so many symbols that we use when reading music. And that's not even including all of the variations that we use when we're teaching students. Think about all of the ways that we teach solfege, we teach rhythm, all of the different things that we use, all the acronyms we get as teachers. What does that mean? And giving examples of what that could look like. So for example, if I'm showing somebody a new symbol, I'm going to want to tie that into symbols that they already know, draw in that background knowledge. If I'm talking about a new composer, I'm going to want to have a picture. I'm going to want to talk about the background of their lives and other composers who lived in the same era. Maybe we look at a piece of art that was created during that same era. Maybe we look at a map and determine how far it is from where we live. Any option to help aid in that comprehension is a huge part of multiple means of representation, the way in which we represent information. So we're going to take a little look here at those three areas and give a couple examples from the music room. We already talked about varying the ways that information is given, giving directions in multiple formats. I'm going to draw on an example from one of my students where I walked into a room and was observing, and the teacher had given an instruction, a verbal instruction. And the student said, "You didn't tell me to do anything." And we think, oh, well, no, I told them the direction. I told them what was expected of them. But in reality, they weren't able to process it because they had their headphones in. They were spacing out. They were overstimulated. Had it been written down, it might have been a different story. We really want to vary the ways in which we share that information. When I present information, I always like to have a visual. And if we look over to give options to aid in comprehension, using visuals with text. You could look at my top 3 bars right now and see the text, or you can look below and you can tell automatically there's a picture. That means visual. I'm going to use that to help me aid in comprehension. You can see the 5 senses. Oh, that must mean that I have to do these 5 senses or think about the 5 senses. Visuals can do so much for us. And this isn't just for students. Again, it's not for people with disabilities, it's for everyone. If you've ever traveled out of the country and really had to use a restroom, you might not be able to read all of the signs. You might not know the language, but you sure do know what the symbol for restroom is. It's just something else that can help have shared information and provide access. And then again, we talked about clarifying vocabulary and symbols. Something that I like to do for my students, especially as they get older, so junior high, high school, when we're talking about music history, is have a glossary. And they can, glue in a little picture. They can write their own notes of what that means and then give some other examples. We review those terms as they come. Sometimes in elementary classrooms, you might see a word wall that kind of does the same thing, especially if there's an image with it. It just helps us to become more comfortable with the terms and the symbols that we might run into. And then our third area of universal design is multiple means of action and expression. And this is kind of one of the harder ones because it does take a little bit more of thinking about ourselves, the way that we like to do things or we intend to do things, and realizing that just because I like something one way doesn't mean that somebody else is going to. Or just because I communicate in one way doesn't mean that somebody else is going to. And that's okay. That's totally okay. But it's about the process of thinking of that. So it's varying the ways in which we respond to other people. I personally, sometimes when I get in a fight with my husband, I don't want to talk to him. So I'll write a note. And then we're able to communicate that way. How many of us need a break sometimes and we just can't keep communicating in the same way? Providing those options and providing feedback in multiple ways. When I was in junior high, I was a student that had a teacher that would come around and leave us notes on our work. And that was a great way to get feedback instead of them standing in front of the room saying, "Elise, you didn't do that part right. Go back and look at that." It took off the social pressure, and it would be positive notes, it would be constructive notes, just feedback in multiple ways. So let's have a little chart of what that might look like. Varying our response methods would be letting students share knowledge in multiple formats. So if I'm asking a student a question, it might be even just that fist to 5 where I say, okay, if you're understanding what we're doing right now, give me a 5. If you're feeling unsure, give me a 3. If you have no idea what I'm doing, give me a 0. They're sharing their knowledge. I could have a little flip chart that has a green side and a red side that says, yes, I understand it's green. No, I do not. It's red. They can tell me. They can write it down. These are all accurate ways and they're valid ways to share knowledge. It just might not all be the same way. And that's okay. We're doing that right now. You can put in the chat. You can use an emoji. You can unmute. You can raise your hand. Lots of ways to respond. There's also providing options for communication. This really ties into that response method, but it focuses more on letting students have discussions and interactions in their method of communication. Something that always bugged me as an adaptive music teacher was when students wouldn't come in with their devices, their voice. We have students that use iPads to communicate. If they don't have their iPad, they can't communicate. That's their voice. So it might take longer, and it might not be the exact term that we're looking for, but they're communicating. I don't really care if they say fast or slow instead of naming the exact tempo. As long as they're understanding and they're communicating, that's okay. And then providing our feedback in multiple ways. We often give verbal and nonverbal responses. And something, again, that I've learned as a neurodivergent person myself is I might think that I'm giving off a nonverbal response, or I might see somebody else and I have no idea that they're trying to give me a nonverbal response. They might be standing there with their arms crossed, rolling their eyes. I might not recognize that because I don't have the social cue to know. I've been trained now that if I see arms crossed, it's cold or upset, but that might not even be true. There are nonverbal cues that we give off all the time. So giving a verbal cue along with it is very helpful, providing feedback in multiple ways. So that's really the introduction of universal design as a whole, our three main areas. Now we're going to look at what that has to do with SEL. Like we said before, SEL, social emotional learning, is about fostering independence, building agency, and building a sense of belonging. So as you're starting to think about all of the examples we gave previously, most of those are doing these things, right? Let's take a look at some of those together. When we talk about identity, we're talking about student voice. We're talking about student choice. Students being able to participate from the get-go and respecting their method. Well, that ties into respecting communication methods. That ties into giving them autonomy, giving them schedules so they understand what's happening in our class. They're being able to give feedback in a way that's meaningful for them. That's identity. It's all right there. So by using UDL, we're integrating SEL. Agency is that second piece. So goal setting, understanding of expectations, being leaders in their own education, and then that willingness and really wanting to engage in their education, that's all agency. We talked about having students set a goal at the beginning of every day and check back in. That reflection piece is a large piece of it. Being leaders in their own education, they get to determine if they're able to participate that day because they have a device to do so, because they're able to communicate as part of it. We're not going to want to be in a space where we don't know what's going on or where we're unable to communicate. When we're given the option to communicate from the get-go and it's understood that any way in which you communicate in this class, you're going to want to communicate in this class. I am under the impression that every child who can does. Every child who can does. And if they can't, it's because they don't have access yet. And we have to find the way to give them that access. That's all under agency. And then if we look at belonging, it's ensuring that students feel safe in our classrooms. It's ensuring that students can excel in all activities and reassuring to students that they are valuable as they are. Again, we do better when we know that we're safe. We do better when we know that we're valued. And what a great way to value somebody than to say, I accept you as you are. I accept your communication style. I understand that I might have to provide visuals for you, so I'm going to do so. I understand that you might not understand what I'm saying, so let's try again. There's no exact right way to do it, but as we're trying to integrate multiple means of representation, engagement, and action and expression, we're hitting identity, agency, and belonging. They really are a perfect pair. So with that in mind, I have some check boxes that I'd like to just talk through. I know we're doing a big conversation tomorrow, but I want to do a little check for understanding here. So I have a little worksheet that you can take with you and use for your first week of school or as your lesson planning. And I want you to take this and see if you can get all 8 of these. And we'll do a little activity here in a minute, but let me just read it to you. So the first one says, provide visual aids when you give written directions. The second says, have each student set a goal for the day. Third is share a daily schedule with students, highlighting those big moments. The fourth is make a guide or a dictionary for upcoming new terms and symbols. The next row says use a thumbs up or thumbs down for students to give feedback. Use an assignment checklist for one assignment. Have students choose a performance method for the day, or use only visuals as directions for an activity instead of a lecture or writing directions. So looking at this chart, I want to hear from all of you. I want you to tell me first, and you can just go ahead and do this in the chat. First, what is an area of this that you either are already doing and didn't realize it was part of universal design, or think that you can incorporate pretty easily? And then number two would be something that you might not have thought to do, either from these examples or from something that we've discussed. So you can put in number one, I'm already doing this, or this would be easy. And number two, I wouldn't have thought of this, and this might seem a little tricky for me. And we'll go ahead and watch the chat for some of your examples. Yeah, we've got some awesome stuff. And I know some of you are still working on here, but a couple comments that have been really great is that some of you are doing a lot of this already. And what I love is that you've noted for younger students, you've noted for all of your students, for older students. We have not referenced specifically students with disabilities in this conversation, right? And I think that's so important to remember, that really what we're doing for our students is for everyone. Accessibility and access is for everyone. It will help all of us. I love that. And I saw somebody else put that they added like visuals and audio. Absolutely. You are ahead of the game. You are a rock star. These are some good places to start. And I want to address, somebody said using only visuals for an activity. Yeah, it fits with English language learners. It's for everyone. It is for everyone. It's for my grandparents who can't read what's on the page and they need a visual icon to tell them what's happening, right? It's for a child who hasn't learned to read yet, so they have a picture book. It's for everyone. Using only visuals. It's for IKEA furniture. Yes, for IKEA, we have the video guide, we have visuals, we have a YouTube video that somebody else made because I'm not able to comprehend the video that IKEA gave me. What's this random leg? I don't know. Exactly. So I don't know if any of you watch the Great British Baking Show, but really what this reminds me of, and again, kind of a big takeaway, is when we have to do that second round of baking, where we have most of a recipe and kind of just have to fill it in. And that's where a lot of our students are at, especially post-pandemic. We generally-ish know what's happening, but there are always pieces in there that we don't exactly know what's expected of us. And by utilizing universal design for learning, we're filling in those pieces or helping students fill it in themselves so that they are able to take it and learn. Yeah, I agree. Executive functioning and processing is a big piece of this. And I'm actually going to just go back a couple slides since you brought that up and really talk about, we're going back to that engagement piece, because this checklist for executive functioning and processing has been the #1 change that I've seen in my students and also in myself. I had a choir director that I'm working with, and we had an a cappella group that was having a lot of trouble staying on task, understanding what assignments were, understanding what things were due. And this was a class. Providing a detailed list of everything that was going to be happening was so important. It was so important. So what they ended up doing was saying, okay, I'm going to put in big, bold pieces, this is the piece that we're doing today. And then underneath, I'm going to put all of the measures that we're doing and a link to the recording track, and I'll email it out in a Google Drive. And the great thing was we would do it for, 2 weeks at a time. Kids would come in having learned the music from next week because we told them what measures we were going to be doing. Providing access to our plans also holds us accountable. How many of you have ever had the student that's like, you didn't teach us this last time, or that's not what you were going to say you're going to do. And that's okay. It's okay for our students to put us back on track as well. Exactly. So we've got just a couple more minutes here, and I want to pull back to this end screen. It's just taking a moment. Okay. So looking at these areas, and I want you to unmute if you feel confident. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be right. But looking at providing visual aids with written directions, does anybody have a student that they feel this could benefit? And in what way? Your own kids. Yeah. How do you think it would benefit your own kids, providing visual aids with written directions?
I was just going to say, I'm not a music teacher, but a music therapist, and visual aids are everything, especially with little ones that are nonverbal. I work with all ages, and I use visual aids all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And I see Julianne too. Yeah, that absolutely would help. And we'll talk more about this as we have a conversation tomorrow and next week. But visuals too don't have to be pictures. It doesn't have to be a picture. Like my house everywhere has little signs that say, don't forget to wash the dishes before you put them in the dishwasher, give them a little rinse. Don't forget that the bus comes at this time or garbage comes at this time. It's just a visual cue. It's like the note that we leave ourselves before we go on a trip the next day and we don't want to forget our toothbrush from the night before. It can be pictures, and that might be more helpful for some people. It can be short text. It can be long text. You can have multiple versions. Yes, for non-English speakers, absolutely. And eventually, maybe you'll get to the point where you have a visual and you have a Spanish keyword and an English keyword, or whatever language is prevalent in your school. Absolutely. Absolutely. You all have such great things. Okay, I want to do one more, and then we're going to have to probably wrap up for the day. But I want to take a look. Yes, literacy issues. Exactly. I want to take a look at down here, having students choose a performance method for the day. How many of you think that that's something you could integrate into your classroom for the day? And if so, what might that look like? We'll just call one or two of you to share out. There's no wrong answers. Yeah, 5th grade, 5 days a week. So yeah. How do they participate in class? So as an example, they want to play an instrument, they want to sing, they want to use movement. Exactly. Think about our kinders and 1st graders when they're talking about steady beat. How do you want to keep the steady beat today? What are the ways we can keep the steady beat? It's already in our music standards. It's already there. It's so Go ahead.
Hi, ladies, and maybe gentlemen, I don't know. But I used to do, well, I've been doing it lately, just having a whole class about dynamics. And yes, they love, forte, forte, forte. But, starting on, pianissimo and slowly building. They not only get the concept extremely well, but it's been a fun and boisterous day of learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, I see some of you saying, I didn't even think of that as a performance. You're right. It's an action. It's a performance in itself, not just like our big performance, for the holidays or at the state, whatever it is. Anytime that we're doing something, it could be considered a performance, just like it would be in our music standards, right? So lots of things are performing in some way, shape, or form. Improvisation is a great one too. And I love the beginning of this conversation, and I'm going to put it in your brain that tomorrow we're going to be talking about all of these elements and breaking it down based on what you are already doing and what's working for you and what challenges you're facing and some ideas of how to overcome those challenges. So awesome. And I will turn it over to Kathleen because I know you said 1:30.
Well, we want to be mindful of everybody's time and schedules. And so a huge thank you, Elise, for managing to package that all up into 30 minutes. We will continue tomorrow. In fact, I had just gone in search of the link so that you can sign up for the second session, which is also free. And that's that conversation. We just want you to be able to have the opportunity to dialogue, not only with our expert here, but also with each other. Thanks, Allie, my right hand over there who found the link in time for me. And also later today, you'll receive a copy of this session video and all of Elise's amazing materials so that you can go back over these things and unpack them for yourselves. So yes, feel free to send us questions in advance at service@musicconstructed.com if you've got something you know you would like to have covered, and join us tomorrow for a conversation with Elise. A huge thank you to all of you for taking time to be here today, and also to Elise for such a fantastic and dynamic presentation.